hello, fantasy baseball fans. I'm Paul Williamson. This is Fantasy MLB Today, a sports ethos presentation brought to you by FanDuel. As always, it's an honor and a privilege to give you all this podcast, give you all the information, advice to help you win your leagues, give your teams a boost. Before we get into the conversation for today, we are inviting Michael Cecchini on to talk about shortstops. We remind you to follow me on Twitter at PaulW_34 to get more of me, asking questions. Hit me up. Let's get ready for 2026. Same thing on Bluesky with no underscore at PaulW34 there. Then also make sure you go over and follow Sports Ethos Fantasy Baseball accounts. Keep track of all of our draft guide content dropping off every day. I'm updating the Williamson 300. Anthony Cates, AK Dynasty 300s out. We're going to have the draft tracker coming out here real soon. All kinds of tools and lovely goodies to help you win your leagues. So make sure you go to sportsethos.com to check that out. And then also please rate and subscribe to podcasts. Please rate and subscribe to podcasts. So you do that where you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple, whatever. And then also on YouTube, where my podcast will be on every Wednesday at Sports Ethos on the Sports Ethos channel on YouTube. All right, with all that lovely housekeeping out of the way, let's bring in Michael Cecchini of Rotoballer. You can follow him on X at Zeitgeist, at Zeitgeist, and then the number 1 on Twitter, and then without the number 1 on Bluesky. He also has a Substack. Go check that out. The link is in his Twitter and Bluesky profile. Michael, how you doing today?
I'm good, Paul. I'm good. Thanks. How you doing?
Doing good, doing good. Remember, you find his stuff on Rotoballer and on his Substack, so make sure you check out his content. So, Michael, let's get into a little bit about who you are. How did you get into baseball originally, and how did you get into fantasy baseball?
Yeah, so I guess the short answer is just through my dad. Shout out Angelo. He was, a big sports fan, is a big sports fan, and baseball in particular. And yeah, I mean, just kind of the basic way. Started playing Little League and, loved that. I was okay for a while. I was pretty decent for a little while. Lefty, I was way ahead of the curve on the deceptive lefty movement. And then that playing kind of fizzled out as I got older. I started doing different things, but yeah, so that's kind of how I got into it. And then fantasy, I I was working this job, like one of those jobs you have in college where it's like this weird part-time job at this telemarketing place. And these guys said, well, we're going to do this football league. And it was all, you had to look at the box scores. This was before Yahoo and CBS and everything got really going. And I did that in the mid-90s and then started doing all of them, football, baseball, basketball, etc. And then I had a little period where I don't know, life got busy and such, so forth. And I wasn't doing it as avidly. But then a few years ago, I kind of got really hardcore back into it. I was playing a lot on Yahoo head to head. And then I started hearing about the NFBC and I just kind of, I don't know, was able to devote more time to it. And I like to write. So that's how I got into doing some of the analysis and stuff.
Right on, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty much kind of the same way. My dad was really into baseball. I play Little League, but I sucked very good. And but I love the game. I grew up in the Astrodome, watching a lot of these Astros, losing to the Braves in the first round all the time. And then you probably didn't get the Braves, and we had to face freaking Kevin Brown in a 5-game series against the Padres back in the day. So we never got out of the first round. The 05 Astros will always have a place in my heart, the original Astros team, to go to the World Series and get promptly swept by the White Sox. But I did go to the 13-inning game in that World Series of the high
Oh,
schoolers. So
right.
that was fun. And then for fantasy, I was the kind of person that would just play the franchise mode on video games, and I would just draft a bunch of teams, and I would just
Right.
simulate, and then draft some more teams and simulate, and then maybe would play a playoff game or something like that. But I never really actually played a game. I just did the GM stuff, all the trades and the signings, the off seasons and stuff like that. So fantasy was kind of a natural transition for me. And I was a journalism major when I went to Texas Tech. And so I graduated Tech, wound up in the restaurant industry with a journalism degree. because it paid the bills. Journalism didn't really pay the bills. And so, but now I'm trying to get back on that horse, trying to, find a way into the industry where I can get paid to write and talk about sports, preferably baseball, but I do football and basketball as well. But baseball is my passion. And so hopefully that's the path I'm making, the path I'm on is what will win out at the end of the day.
That's great. That's cool. I mean, I'm not having me on's probably not gonna help the cause, but, I'm just being, stupid, but yeah, that's awesome. I see you're really active on social media and you do a great job with the pod and stuff. So yeah, onwards and upwards.
Appreciate that. Thank you, man. I really do appreciate that. I just do what I can to push myself out there, and maybe one of these days I'll break out and win some of these NFBC leagues and get a little cred because I only recently last year was my first year doing TGFBI, first year doing NFBC leagues. I always kind of pedaled around the public leagues. That's all I could really afford. Was the main reason. But I got lucky, Sports Ethos is helping me out and put me in some of those leagues, some of the big dogs. So, I finished middle of the pack at TGFBI last year. So hopefully I do better this year. And, I'll keep getting better. And that's one thing I realized about content creation is that I feel like it's made me a better player because I get more in tune to the data, especially blurbing. I blurb a lot for Sports Ethos. And so just doing all that legwork every day I think has made me a much better player. So I'm very happy about where I'm at. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, staying on top of the news in terms of playing time trends or, tweaks a pitcher's making or stance change or drive line, of course, what have you. But it's hugely important. And it's one of the things that makes baseball, I think, so much more. There's numerous factors that make it more complex than football or any other fantasy game, at least the roto format, but there's just so many players and there's so many things and the minor leaguers are so relevant. I mean, if you're doing basketball like fantasy, you don't need to know what's going on in the G League 90, even if you're playing for money. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
have to be as tied into that kind of stuff. And football's the same way. It's just a simpler, more concentrated universe of information.
Yeah, I mean, like a standard baseball league, you need to know the top 200 players easily. Standard
Yeah,
basketball or football leagues, you don't really have to go that deep. You
yeah,
got to know the top 12 or so quarterbacks, the top 30 or so receivers, running backs, and then that's about it. And then,
yeah.
I'm lucky in the Dynasty Football League that I'm in with my buddies. We eliminated kickers and defense. We just said, nah, we're not doing that. That's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
we just got rid of them, and so we're super
yeah, no,
flex, and so
mhm,
it's no IDP, no defense, no kickers. It's just quarterbacks, receivers, and tight ends and running backs, and I love that league. It's my favorite league, and I made it to the finals this year.
so good.
Traded 2 first-round picks for Josh Jacobs, who promptly got hurt. So,
Of
like,
course,
damn it.
right,
Um,
right.
Anyways, man. Before we get into the conversation on shortstops, there's one news item I want to get to, and that's the Brandon Woodruff situation. Well, I don't want to call it a situation in Milwaukee, but yesterday it was, we don't know if he's ready for opening day with this lat strain. Today, he's probably going to be ready for opening day with this lat strain. How are you viewing Woodruff's value with these day by day conflicting reports on his opening day availability?
Well, I haven't been drafting him. I've done 10, I think, drafts so far, and it's not because of the skills. I know his velocity was down and some of the stuff numbers were down versus his, you know, sort of vintage of a couple 3 years ago, but it's more so he's going, like, around 100, 110, right? And I don't know, there's a lot of guys I like around there that don't have those questions. They might not have his upside either, but, I mean, that's still kind of a spot in the draft where I wanna be able to rely on the guy. Now this could be, you know, not that we're all always consistent in everything, but, like, I have drafted Wheeler once, but I think Wheeler's peak is higher than Woodruff's, right? So,
Yeah.
um, I think he'll be really good when he pitches. I think there'll be limited innings. You gotta kinda just build that in. I suppose if you had like a Logan Webb or you had a really good base of innings earlier or you make up for it right after, it's fine. I he's not like a cross off for me. It's just I am not targeting him with all the questions and the limitations that are likely present.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love Brandon Woodruff. I had him as a little bit of a draft, and I don't say draft to stash. I think early in the offseason last year or late in the spring, there was some chance to return a little earlier. But I was chomping at the bit to have him on rosters last year when he finally got the call up. So I've got no real concerns about the skills because even with the decreased velocity, he started to rely more on a cutter last year, and he's starting to change. He's a smart pitcher. He showed that
Mhm.
he was able to change his pitch mix in a way to deal with the dip in velocity. So I'm not too worried about the skills. I mean, the numbers were all there for him last year. It's just a matter of the injury risk here. And like you said, he's currently going 108 and NFBC online championship leagues going around guys like Trevor Story, who actually had a full season of health last year. Nico Horner's going right before him. Right after him, you got Yanier Diaz in a two catcher leagues. That's a pretty good value there. Ozzy Altuve. You mentioned Zach Wheeler, I think is a better option. I'm a little more in on Wheeler than most because of his TOS was not a structural one. It was more of a pain relief surgery than it was a structural one. So I think it's a venous TOS as opposed
Uh,
to,
yeah,
or
Venus, I think it is, but yeah.
no, or maybe it was the other kind. I
Mhm.
can't remember.
It
It's
was the
the good
better
one.
one. It was the good
Yeah.
one.
And so, I don't think it's going to be impact him as much as people think. So yeah, no, you got guys going just after him and just before him that I prefer safer. And even like his max pick is 130. I wouldn't go 130 either. I would probably want to see him get to at least pick 150 or 160 or so before I would consider Brandon Woodruff. So is that about the
Right.
cost you would consider, Michael, or would you want to go a little deeper than that?
I think I would think about it there. I think that because right around him, you have guys that I like that have shown either more durability and maintain their skills or kind of better skills in terms of guys like Lodolo and Pepio. And then you have like the exciting kind of Schlitlers and your Savage going in that one, couple rounds later, 120, 130. Yeah, but I think he would be more attractive there because there's also questions once you get to like Gavin Williams or
Mhm.
Sandy Alcantara has questions. Yeah, I would definitely think about it there. I think you start to get into um tougher calls around 150 with, Gore and Evaldi and yeah, those kind of guys. So
Right.
yeah, if there was a little more discount, I'd be more aggressive with him.
Yeah, absolutely. It is just way too rich for my blood at this moment. Alrighty, man. So let's get into the shortstop previews. So this is how we're gonna do it. When we get into the players, we're gonna break things up by tier to begin with for the guys going in the top 100, because there are some notable drop off in ADP. We group these guys together, and then we'll talk about some later round targets and fades before we get into our deeper sleepers. But to start off, Michael, what are your initial thoughts on the position in terms of how deep it is? Are you willing to wait, or do you feel like you have to get one of the top dudes?
Well, I've mixed it up a little bit, but I do like to get, I do kind of want to get one of the top, I don't know, 8 or 10 or so, but I don't want to force it either. I think there's kind of an interesting question about shortstop versus outfield early in drafts. I think you can make it work either way, but yeah, overall, I think it's kind of, I don't think of it as deep. I think of it as dense in the sense that there's a lot of talent concentrated, kind of in the top 20. and then there's sort of questions after that, and if you're so even in a well, like in a 15-team league especially, you do I personally wanna kinda get a guy that I feel really good about who's, you know, in the top 10 to 12 range, um but yeah, I think it doesn't have as many interesting names once you get past the top 20 or 25, like, second base is a just objectively worse, more gross position, but there's guys that you can see later on in drafts working out or bouncing back or, I think there's more interesting kind of depth in outfield, second base, even third base, I think has some interesting names later. So by the middle rounds, I want to have my starting guy. And if I can double up, if you're playing with a middle infield, you know, it's nice to get the second guy as a shortstop as well because there's just not a lot of it doesn't go that deep in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm in my first official draft right now at NFBC 50, and then I've done a few mocks, and I've noticed every single time I've gone shortstop, shortstop in terms of my first two middle infield options. I think you're right in terms of when you get to the middle rounds, you're more likely to find a better shortstop value than you are a second base value. And I find myself targeting, the Bryson Stotts of the world, yeah, maybe Otto Lopez, those kind of guys
Mhm.
closer to the pick 175 and beyond. Because I think those are more worth the value because the middle round second basemen just are kind of blah. The Aussie Albies of the world. So I'm most likely going to be having two shortstops before I draft a second baseman. But I also think it is deep enough where, like, if I do miss out on the Wits and the Gunners and the Ellie De La Cruzes of the world, I wouldn't mind having someone like Jeremy Pena as my first shortstop. Maybe let me go. I got the list right here. I want to look at it. Jeremy Pena, maybe Corey Seager, Trevor Story, Willie Adames for sure. We'll talk about Adames more later, I'm sure. These are all guys I'd be very comfortable with my starting shortstop, and then just snagging a second one probably pretty soon afterwards because the value will be there. So yeah, no, absolutely. I'm with you on terms of the comparison between shortstop and second base. But yeah, any more thoughts on the general things before we get into specific players?
No, not really. No.
Cool. All right, so the first tier of shortstops, these are guys that are all going pretty much in the first round in terms of ADP. Now, this is ADP beginning of February 1st of NFBC online championships. So, don't include like the NFBC 50s draft and holds or the draft champion stuff. There's just online championships here. So, we're looking at Bobby Witt going at round pick 3, the third, number 292 is his, then Ellie De La Cruz at 833, Gunnar Henderson is going around 12 at 12.75. So of these three, any of them that you like or don't like at their current cost, or are you pretty much fine with all of them?
I like all these guys. I mean, I think they're in the first round or borderline first round for a reason. And they're really in sort of segments of it in such a way that if you're in a snake draft, you're not gonna have the option to really you could jump Gunner up if you like him more than Ellie, I suppose, but you're really kind of limited to where your draft slot falls. But I mean, they're all great players, obviously. Witt, I wouldn't take him over Judge. I wouldn't take him over Tani, but I mean, he just does everything really well. His contact rates are good. The quality of the contact is really good. Um, and he was really lucky in terms of, or unlucky, excuse me, in terms of power last year. He hit 63 barrels, which is quite a bit, and he only had 23 home runs. And usually that's at least a half, 50%, but it's usually a little more. I think it's like 54% of barrels are home runs, just if you go league wide with it. Um, like he had 2 fewer barrels than Joe Adell and, Rooker, who both were 30. He had the same number of barrels as Springer, who had 32. So with the walls moving in and the height going down a little bit, I would not be surprised at all if Wick goes 30, 35 or 30 plus with 40 steals with a good average. So he's awesome. And then Ellie, I think he might end up being a huge bargain. I mean, in the first half, he was hitting 284 with 18 bombs and 25 steals, um, which was like a 28-40 pace with those obviously plus average. And he had a 13% barrel rate. His EV90 was 108.6, which is super high. And then, of course, he had this quad injury, which was reported later. But that cropped up, I believe, in July or maybe even late June. And then in the second half, it was, a 6% barrel rate, 106 EV90. That's a big drop. And then he only hit 4 bombs, 12 steals, 236. So no, I don't think he's going to hit 280 for an entire season, but I think it's very possible that he repeats like a 260. And if he's healthy, you know, his kind of homers and steals could be Whit-like for sure. And if he gets some BABIP luck, and he runs a little more, although I'm worried about Francona maybe not letting him run wild like he did a couple years ago.
Mhm.
He could be one of those guys who ends up higher even on the player rater than his ADP. And then Gunnar, I think, also dealt with a couple injuries and oblique. And he went from 30 plus homers to 20, right? So it's like I see a lot of ways that, and then what I loved about Gunnar last year too is he's like, well, I'm not hitting homers, and he did all of his fantasy, dork drafters a favor and stole, you know, a crap load of bases, especially in the second half. So yeah, and he'll be in a prime spot in a good lineup. I think that lineup really got buttressed with Alonso. So I like all three of them. I could see Gunnar kind of getting back to that 30 homer. I think of him more as a 30-20 guy as opposed to, I wouldn't expect, you know, 25 steals or 30 steals or anything, but um, it's a good plate approach, could hit for a good average. So yeah, I like all of them. If you can get like a Gunner, if you're in a 12-teamer and you get Gunner and Churio or, Gunner and Caminero or, some combination like that, or a pitcher with Gunner as your first hitter, I think is interesting. Yeah, for sure.
No, I feel you. And so I'm with you on Wit. I think the power will be back. Like you said, that barrel rate and all the quality contact metrics were there, the same as they were when he was hitting 30 homers. So I think he's going to get back there. I'm not worried about the power. I'm in on Wit there. I do in my rankings do have Gunner over Ellie. And you mentioned the Francona maybe being a little more hesitant on how aggressive he is with him, and then also here's my thing on Ellie is that it's a high risk, high reward scenario here for him. He is someone that could, if he ended up being the top player in fantasy next year, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Wouldn't be shocked because he's got that kind of talent. He absolutely does. For my first round pick, I want someone who I am more confident in returning first round value, and I think the range of outcomes for Ellie is a little bit wider than it is for Gunner. I'm very confident that Gunner's going to get the power back. He's someone's going to get the 30 homers again. The shoulder impingement last year, I think, really, and you mentioned the oblique as well, were things that kind of hurt his abilities. He mentioned specifically that the impingement in his shoulder hurt his ability to keep the bat on a plane, which would affect the barrel rate. That was the only metric that dropped. I mean, the exit velocities, the hard hit rates were all there for Gunner. They were there for him. And the only thing that dropped was the barrel rate. And so I think that kind of his statement tracks with the data. And so that's why I don't normally pay that much attention to what players say. But when there's extra things to back it up, I put a little more weight into it. And so I just think that while I think Ellie's ceiling is higher than Gunner's, I think Gunner's floor is that much better than Ellie De La Cruz is, which is why for me he's a slight fade. I'm not out, right? If I'm at the end of the first round and Ellie's sitting there, take him. There's no doubt. But if I'm middle of the first round, pick 7, 8, 9, I'm picking Gunner if he's there. And so that's just where I am on these three. Any additional thoughts on that before we move on to the next batch?
Not really, but I mean, it's defensible, your ranking. I'm not, I'm not like, oh my God, that's crazy. And the nice thing about it is that you can wait. So if you are later in the first round, or if you do KDS, the Kentucky Derby style, where you kind of rank your preferences, which NFBC uses, if you like, especially in a 12, I think more than a 15, but if you kind of like the way the ADP falls in the first few rounds, and you think you like the pictures and how it lays out and everything, if you want to be in that back area and target Gunner, I think that's, especially if you have him ranked that way. And I could totally see him um uh finishing higher than this ADP. So yeah, I like all of them. They're all great.
Yeah, it was kind of like with me last year with Francisco Lindor. End of the first round last year, I was taking Lindor all day, every day. And I really like the way my offense set up in those leagues. My problem last year in a lot of my leagues, I took some risks and some pitchers that got hurt, namely Tyler Glasnow, and so my pitching wasn't all that great last year, but I felt real confident in the way my hitting was in all my leagues, and then getting Lindor in that end of the first round in a lot of leagues was a big help. So you're right. That end of the first round, I'm taking Gunnar Henderson a lot. Him and Kyle Tucker are two of my end of first round targets that I just would love to have. Next batch of names here. Fourth, fifth, and sixth shortstops going off the board, real close to the ADP. You got Francisco Lindor going to 23.42, Zach Neto 26.58, and Trey Turner going 27.29. Lindor is only in this group because of the injury. What are your thoughts on these three names? Which guys are you avoiding? Any of these guys? Are you targeting them? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Lindor is one of those players that, excuse me, before the injury, I try to deep dive pretty much everybody, and I looked at him, I looked at his Fangraphs page and Savant page and everything, but I didn't like go digging that deep on him or worried about his plate discipline or anything like that. One of the beautiful things about Lindor is you can kind of pencil in the production if he's healthy. I mean, the injury raises interesting questions. I think with him, I would probably buy the dip, but I would say that um, I already had Neto really close with Lindor and not that far behind Gunner either. So if I'm at the end of the second or the 2-3 turn and they're both there with the hamate injury for Lindor, I would go Neto personally. Not that he's been a bastion of health in his own right, but he's healthy right now, and you know, Lindor's barrel rate dropped almost 5%. But again, I'm not that worried about him. He pulls it in the air really well. He had a 23% pull air rate. Um, he consistently does that, and I think he'll be really, really strong. You know, but I just think Neto has shown so much growth over the last couple of years. Um, 26-26 in limited time. Um, he also is, 24% pull air rate is really high, and he has shown a skill to do that. But he's not doing it in the Paredes way where it's like, oh, this is 99 EV, mile per hour EV, but I just yank it. His barrel rate jumped to 14%. The hard hit rate is almost 47%. Um, and he's aggressive on the base pass. You can tell he wants to steal. I'm sure. Well, I wouldn't say I'm sure, but I can imagine him thinking, I want to be a 30-30 guy. I want to be at least, steal 25 bags or what have you. He already stole a base the first spring training game. The lineup is
Yeah.
worse. The lineup is worse than the Mets or the Orioles or the Phillies. So I think you have to kind of lower your expectations a little with the runs and RBI, but I don't know. I just think he's a really exciting talent, and I like the price on him. And then Turner resembles Lindor in some ways, very consistent. I know what I'm going to get. I don't think he's going to hit, close to 300 again, but it's going to be a positive batting average that helps. He's probably, if he's not leading off, he's second. And so, both him and Neto, there is a question of, well, are they going to score 100 runs or 100 plus runs, but only give you 70, 80 RBI? So sometimes the leadoff thing, you know, it cuts
Yeah.
both ways. It cuts both ways. But again, this is another strong group. Like I said earlier, I think there's a lot of great talent in the top 15 to 20 at shortstop. So I like all of them. I think it depends. If I took a guy if I had a decent batting average base, I would probably just go Neto every time. Like if I'd taken Judge or Witt, if
Mhm.
I wanted to double up. But yeah, I like all three again. I just think you got to be a little careful with Lindor and watch the news on his injury, obviously.
Right, and that's one thing with Lindor. At the moment, he's a fade for me just because I gotta get an update. I gotta know if he's gonna be ready for opening day or not. I know there's this whole optimism surrounding it, but, a 15 days stay on the IL kinda turns into a month, and then you're losing out on production, and so, he is a first round talent. I think you alluded to it whenever you say it's hard to really dive deep into Lindor's metrics because he's been so good for so long, so consistent. It's hard to be like, oh, well, there was a 2 point drop in the zone contact and like a 4 point drop in this and da 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 da. Da. It's like, well,
Right.
until we start to see like a steady decline, I'm not going to read too much into the metrics here for a player like Lindor. But for me, it's just a matter of is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be ready? Because 1 month of production, man, that's what, like 15 to 20 RBI and runs, about 4 or 5 homers he's missing out on. So that's real production that you're missing out on. And that's what pushes so many guys, in my opinion, ahead of him right now. Now come talk to me in a couple of weeks, and the Mets are all like, he's gonna be fine. He'll be ready for opening day, 100% ready to go. All right, I'm moving him back up and I'm drafting him. But until that happens, I can't have him that high. I love Zach Neto, man. He's got his contact rate good enough now. He was
Yeah.
74%, I think, last year, and it's the 72 this past year, to 74 the year before, and now that he's really tapped in to his power. Getting up to a 14% on the barrel, 46% on the hard hit, and so now that he's tapped into that power, that contact rate staying above 70% in my view is good enough. I talked about that a lot on the podcast in terms of it just being good enough. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be great, doesn't have to be elite. You just got to make enough contact to get yourself enough homers, get you enough hits to be productive. And that's exactly what Zach Neto is. And then Trey Turner, my problem with Turner right now, and while this is where I have him ranked, is then this is right after Neto and on the shortstop ranks. But I'm not going to be pushing him up. And if anything, there might be a chance he might go a little bit lower for me. I think I'm a little bit under market on him on my ranks. And that's because the ground ball rate for 2 straight years has been 47%. And he's starting to kind of lose a little bit of that lift, which means that it's going to suppress his power. So I view him more of a 15 to 20 homer dude. Even in the barrel rate, probably might normalize back up to 7 or 8%. But without the corresponding increase in the lift, I don't know how much I could trust Trey Turner's power. Now, look, he has an elite floor when it comes to counting stats and stolen bases. And the batting average, I think, is going to be at least solid. Like you said, I don't think he's going to be a 300 hitter again, but he's at least going to be an okay batting average asset with really good counting stats and steals. And so I'm not like a major fade on him, but I definitely have him in between these two tiers in terms of a healthy Lindor and Neto, and then a little bit of drop off, then Trey, and then we get into the next couple of names. Is kind of how I view Mr. Turner. And then also one intriguing note here, a little shout out for our sponsor, FanDuel. Francisco Lindor is currently one, two, three, fifth in NL MVP voting at plus 1,800, with better odds than Corbin Carroll, who's at plus 2,500. So if you're a futures betting kind of person, I think you're looking at a decent discount on Carroll versus Lindor here,
Yeah.
because they both pretty much have close to the same injury here, and I think have very similar upside. So just kind of a side note there on the FanDuel odds. All right. So any additional thoughts before we move on to the next batch of names, Michael? Sorry.
No, no, either one's fine. Mike's fine.
Sure.
You know, yeah, I agree with you. That is the thing about Turner is I'm a little concerned. I've drafted him once, maybe twice even, but I am a little concerned that we get like 15 home runs. Luckily, the park is really, a plus park for hitters, but I'm a little concerned we get like 15 home runs and 73 RBI or something with 110 scored, and you're kind of imbalanced there already in two categories. So, and he gets nicked up a little bit too here and there. He's not an Iron Man, let's put it that way. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's defensible. I think the ADP is fine, but like you said, maybe a little half step down from these other two.
Cool. All right. The next two guys are kind of on a tier of their own in terms of ADP. You got Mookie Betts and CJ Abrams going pretty much back to back as the seventh and eighth shortstops. Betts at 57 even on the ADP. CJ Abrams 58.88. What are your thoughts on these two dudes at their current cost?
Man, it's interesting. This it's kind of funny. The Dodgers added Tucker and all their guys except Shohei are going later. Like even Tucker, I mean, he's starting to go up a couple spots now, but it's just kind of funny. Betts and Freeman, and there's reasons. I mean, they're getting older, and there's a lot of some of the contact rate with Freeman, and some of the um, obviously the power outage for Betts that we've seen the last couple seasons. What I find interesting about Betts, now he had this illness and he lost a lot of weight right when they were doing these Korea series or right before that started, right before the season started last year. We've all heard he lost 17 pounds or he lost 21.5 pounds or whatever it was. And he didn't have a lot to lose, right? He didn't have a lot of extra to give up there. But if you look at it, uh his bat speed and exit velocities and such, they weren't that different in 2025 than they were in 2024. It was really like, if you look at his bat speed, it dropped 2 miles an hour in 2024 and held steady in 2025. So there isn't like it wasn't just like this illness hit and it took his production down. 2024, he missed a little time, but he hit 19 home runs. He had a better OPS. He was a better hitter all around. His on base and his overall slugging was better. But we saw that peak in 2023, and I don't see that coming back. At the same time, it's like, he's Mookie Betts. Like he's in a 12. This is pick, around 55, 57. That's, middle of the fifth round. It's tempting. I could see doing it. I haven't pulled the trigger on him, but I've second guessed that at times, wondering if I made a mistake there. And the projection's fine. Like you look at Bat X and it's 20 homers, 8 steals, 266 average. That's really solid. And if he stays healthy, the counting stats could be insane. The runs and RBI could be insane. It looks like he's going to bat third.
Yeah.
So we could really see a lot of runs driven in with the plate discipline and on base that Otani and Tucker will have in front of him. So he's tempting. I just haven't done it. I think there is kind of like Turner. I think there is a world where you end up in the teens with home runs. And he hasn't been running, he doesn't run a ton. He's never been like a 30 steal guy in recent years. So, and like Bad X is saying 8. I think he needs 8 steals, but that's kind of interesting that it's that low. And then Abrams, I've always liked him. I kind of want I wonder if I've over sort of overrated him or I'm stuck with a bias of how I felt about him a couple years ago. It's just okay quality of contacts, 7, 8% barrel, under 40% hard hit. He does hit it at good angles, like his launch angles. He's not just beating the ball into the ground, so that helps. But I don't know. That lineup is pretty scary bad. Um,
Mm.
his career OBP is 306. I know he's been a leadoff guy the last couple years, but you have a new regime in charge for the Nats. And I do wonder, do they say, I don't know, is he just guaranteed to hit leadoff indefinitely? I kind of wonder. And if not, that takes, you know, some shine off of the runs category and maybe the steals too. If he's kind of further down the lineup, I don't know if he gets the opportunity where the bases are open in front of him. I think he's solid. Again, his projection is 16 homers, 30 steals, 244. The Bad X. I wish I believed that he could hit high, hit a like a 270 batting average, and I guess he could. There's obviously the potential that he gets a really good bit this year and hits for higher average, but you can't bank on it. So yeah, I'm a little down on him relative to prior seasons. I think the ADP is okay. I don't think it's, absurd or crazy that it's end of the 5th round here. He's solid. I could see taking a chance on both these guys, but I think they do have a couple of questions around.
Yeah, yeah, and here's the crazy thing about CJ Abrams. I want to get. I mean, you may know because you probably just had his page open and you probably saw it. But how old do you think CJ Abrams is?
Oh, I didn't have his page open. I think he's 24, right?
Yeah, he's 25, and I don't know if it's
Mm,
because he's been in the league for a few years already. I thought he was older than that. Honestly, when I first started doing my research, that kind of stuck out to me. I was like, wow, he's still like 25.
yeah.
And so, in my opinion, you're looking at a guy who's 25 years old, who already has home run seasons of 18, 20, and 19, stolen bases 47, 31, 31. And then we are looking at a batting average that went up to 257 last year with an improved strikeout rate. He's also, let me see here. Let me look at the batted ball stuff here. Yeah, we're seeing improvement in the line drive rate, got up to 19.9% last year. So that's probably driving a little bit of the batting average there. I like both Abrams and Betts at these costs. I have Abrams slightly ahead of Betts because I mean that's a better floor than you may think of when you think of CJ Abrams. I think CJ Abrams has this kind of high volatility kind of aura about him. And I think it might have to do with some of the off the field stuff. I'm pretty sure he was the guy that went to to a casino or something,
Yeah, yeah. So
the
5-1.
night before a day game or something like that. And so there might be some attitude questions surrounding him. So, but at the end of the day, man, the numbers don't lie. And he's a guy that I think, unlike Betts, I think you're going to get, very close to 2020. Yeah, I think you're looking at a guy who have a barrel rate that has gone up from 6.9 to 7.6%. You already mentioned the pull rates for him. So I think he's 25. So, another modest increase in the barrel rate from 7.6 up to around what, 9% or so, get him a little bit above league average, get a little bit more on the line drives, improve the batting average a little bit. If he ends up hitting 25 homers and stealing 20 bases, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And then also that the lineup for the Nationals isn't good, but it's top heavy. And he's going to be at
Mm,
the top with guys like Wood, guys like Cruz, and there's another name on that's escaping me right now. They got guys at the top that are at least okay. Guys that can get on base for him to drive in. Hopefully, in my opinion, he bats third or fourth, where he's not. If he's batting, I would be more concerned for his steals if he was batting in front of a James Wood. just because, Wood would be in the bat box whenever he's on first, and I don't know how aggressive they'll want to be with that scenario. Take the bat out of Wood's hand kind of thing. But at the end of the day, man, they've been aggressive with Abrams on the base paths for 3 years in a row now. There's no reason, in my opinion, why they would ever let up. And so I like Abrams, and I like him a little bit better than Betts. Now, Betts, is good for me at cost, but I'm not reaching. He's good at cost because, like I mentioned with Turner, he's got that good counting stat floor. He's batting at third in a Dodger lineup. And so even if he doesn't hit a lot of homers, I still think he's going to have decent enough gap power where he's going to get some doubles with guys on base to get some RBI, with the deep lineup behind him. He's going to score some runs. So, for Betts, I love that counting stat. So I think he's a guy that can get like, 90 runs, 90 RBI, bat 270, 280 as a floor. And then if we see that illness really did impact him that much, because in September, I know it's just 1 month, but in September,
Yeah.
the barrel rates came back. The hard hit rate came back. That September StatCast data was really good. So I think there's an argument to be made that it just took him that long to recuperate from the illness, and then he busted out at the very end. But, it's still just a month. I can't read too much into a month. But, for me, it's good enough toward where he's not a fade in my book. He's not necessarily a target. I'm not reaching past in front of pick 50 for him. But, if I don't have my shortstop yet, he's sitting there at pick 56, 57, 58, and I need a shortstop, and Abrams is already gone. I'll take Betts. I got no problem with that. No problem with that at all. Any additional thoughts on those guys?
No, you pulled me back towards CJ a little bit there. I think you made some good points, and yeah, I think you're right. I don't worry about the off the field stuff. I think whatever, we all probably did some really crazy dumb
Yeah,
stuff when we were 23 or whatever he was when that happened. 20,
tell me about it.
end of the. But yeah, you're right. He has good contact rates. His swinging strike rates are fine, like 11%. So he's not whiffing all the time. He chases a little, but yeah, yeah, I think he's fine. But I just think there is a world where he hits like 240 and gets moved out of the leadoff spot. So, but yeah, I've taken him. I'll probably take him again. And I think you made good points with Betts. Betts fun, it's kind of funny on the other end. It's like, how young is Abrams? Like, Mookie's 33. That makes me feel a little old that he's,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, wow, Mookie Betts is 33. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's all again.
Which isn't terribly old, 33, there's still a lot of good baseball ahead of him. But it is kind of starting to get to that age cliff area zone. I don't know how much the age cliff will necessarily impact Betts, though, the type of hitter that he is. I still think that I think he's going to be a top 100 fantasy player for at least another 4 or 5 years. If I have him on a dynasty league, I'm not like looking to sell him now. I still think that you can field a competitive squad with Betts as your starting shortstop for the next at least 3 or 4 seasons. So I'm Betts. I don't think is going to have a massive age cliff, just destruction to his career. I think it's going to be a slow, steady drop off, something that you can definitely live with for multiple years from here on out. So,
Yeah.
anyways, moving on to the next 3 names on the list. There are 11 shortstops that go in the top 100. And I went ahead and grouped Geraldo Perdomo since he's kind of on an island, sitting there at pick number 78 after CJ Abrams at 58. And then from 78, with Perdomo, the 10th shortstop is going at number 93.5. That's Jeremy Pena. And then Corey Seager at 98.67. What are your thoughts on these 3 names? Are you fading any of them, targeting them? Well, what are your thoughts?
Uh, yeah, I think that yeah, this is interesting. I think I like Pena's balance. He's another one that, I don't think is gonna like Turner. I don't think 300 batting average is necessarily real or something we should be expecting. He had a 345 BABIP, which was um 30 points higher than his career number. But, you know, barrel rate up 3% to 8.2. He got the pull air rate up 6% to 21%, which is really good. Obviously, the Crawford boxes, we all know about that. At Minute Maid, Dakin, whatever it's called now.
Yeah.
His speed is elite. He's 97th percentile in speed. His defense is elite. Um, I sometimes wonder if we should like him more, but I think that there are some questions of can we really get to 20 plus home runs? And he ran more last year, on a per game basis. Does he continue to do that? Sometimes that's kind of with Betts and Abrams. I sometimes look at Pena, you know, 30, 40 picks later, and I kind of think, well, maybe I can just do that when when I'm in drafts, because also the thing about Betts and Abrams, they go in a range where I'm often taking pitching. I think there's good pitching in that fifth, sixth round. But yeah, and then Perdomo's interesting. I actually drafted Perdomo once. I wouldn't say I'm really high on him. He's kind of interesting because the hard contact or quality of contact isn't good, um, or isn't above average, but he did bring it up. I mean, the 87.6 average EV, 32% hard hit, those are actually up for him. He does he makes a ton of contact. He doesn't strike out. I mean, um, and he did raise his pulled air rate. So you look at the barrels and the exit velocities and you say, well, yeah, I don't know how much, this is a guy who hit like 7 home runs a couple years ago. What do I think is really who's the real Perdomo? But he has such great bat control and barrel control, um, that I think the pull air stuff is a skill with him. You know, unless he changes the approach, I guess we don't know that, but he did show that ability. Um, the projections aren't great, so if you're just a projections drafter, he's probably way overpriced at this, uh, in the 90s. But I don't know, like Bad X has him hitting 255. Oopsie says 258. I don't think it'll be 290 plus, but he hit 273 in 2024, and then he hit 290 last year. So I'm not sure why we're expecting him to hit 250, in the 250s. So he's interesting. I think depending on your build, if you need some speed and you need some average, I wish he was going a little later, given that I don't think we're seeing 2030 again. But sometimes people say that and they say, well, he's not that guy. And it's like, well, he just did it. I mean, he just actually did it. So I don't know if we could just blow it off. But and then Seager, I think I've just drafted different things because I've actually seen him go later than this in some of the drafts I've done. And I've been tempted, and it's kind of like right when I decide, oh yeah, I'll do it. I'll take Seager. He goes ahead of me. I mean, he led all shortstops with a 400 x WOBA. That's like ridiculous. Um, there aren't many guys that have a higher than 360, 370 x WOBA or WOBA. So he's a great hitter. The Bat X says in 122 games, 28 homers, 275 average, and the price has never been this low, at least not in the last 5, 6 years. So um, yeah, he's solid. I can see doing it. I know that I think part of his cost is due to the fact that people want speed out of their middle infield or their shortstop. But he's just he's a great hitter and he has really good power. It's just also, do you want to deal with the annoyance of he pulled this, or this is the 3 IL stints, even if they're shorter. You get the replacement value. I hear that argument, and it has some validity, of course. But yeah, I think if he falls, I like it a lot, but it I don't necessarily target him. at least because I kind of do want some speed usually out of middle infield, and the injury questions, it's just annoying to own him. There's guys like him and like Blake Snell where I don't know, it's just stressful and I like other names in the range that they're going anyway. So I don't have to deal with the headache. But I get it too. I get it. Like, yeah.
Right on. So for me personally, Perdomo, anybody listens to the podcast knows he's a fade for me. In the Williamson 300, I have him raked along with Pena and Singer closer to the 100 range than he is currently going around the 75 range. And the big reason being is that this so much has to go right for him to get this ADP. The big thing being that last year he was able to accumulate, with the 90+% contact rate, a 6% barrel rate can play because that's still like 6% barrel on a bunch of contact. And so, that can get the power numbers up a little bit, can make that. And, like you mentioned, the pull rate was high. But I want to point out that the pull rate looks high because of a second half pull rate that went up to 46% in the second half, where he hit 10 of his final homers in the second half. In the actual second half post All-Star break, so around 100 or so less plate appearances. So he hit a high concentration of homers in that second half. I wonder if that is a repeatable, if that's something that he can continue on. And then in order for him to get the runs and RBI, he has to accumulate. Last year was the first time he got to 700 plus plate appearances. You mentioned the IL stints, just a few stints in the IL gets a bump here, misses a few games here, a few games there. His per game value isn't good enough to make up for it, right? So that's why guys like Corey Seager or guys that go ahead of him like Betts and Abrams, those guys have better per game values because their counting stats and in their elite lineups, their abilities to get home runs are a little more solidified than Perdermo's. So, in a per game basis, those guys become more valuable and you can make up for those short stints in the IL. Perdomo can't. He's not someone who's going to hit the ball very hard in order to get there. Also, the barrel rate doubled. It went from 3% to 6%. And so that for me, that's a dramatic increase. I don't know if that's a sustainable increase. And so I've just got too many questions on Perdomo, whether or not he can return or continue to be that kind of dude. Also, just in general, a guy has a major career year like this. It's going to be really hard for me to trust him to fight the next season. And then,
That's fair. I get that. Yeah. I mean, he's
yeah,
young
and
too. I mean, I can see growth with his age, but yeah, totally fair points, I think. Yeah.
yeah, just a guy that kind of had like 300 or so plate appearances the past couple of seasons, then pops off with 700 plus with 20 homers, 100 RBI. I don't know about that, man. That just seems really hard,
Okay.
impossible almost to duplicate. And then for me, I like Pena at this cost. You're right, the 300 batting average probably won't return, but I do like the fact that we've seen the increase in the barrel rate, the increase in the hard hit rates, two straight campaigns of at least 20 homers. Batting in Houston gives him a good power floor. So I think the floor power with Pena is around 14 to 15 homers. But I think he's someone that has 20 plus homer potential because of his ability to pull the ball, because we do see an increase in the barrel rate from year to year. So another slight increase, unlike Perdomo, his barrel rate doubled. With Pena, I think he went from like 6 or 7% up to 8%, and so that's a much more believable increase. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if he makes another jump in barrel rate, get to the 9% range, 9.5%, 10 range there. So I think 20 plus homers is in the cards. With the batting average won't be 300, but it'll probably be around 270, 280. Batting in a really good Houston lineup. He's the leadoff hitter there for sure. So it's a good lineup context and all that. Corey Seager, for me, it's just the health. Can he stay healthy? 3 straight 15% barrel rate seasons from Seager, which means that, Texas has become a pitcher's park almost out of nowhere over the past couple of seasons. But I think with those type of metrics that Seager has, his power will play there regardless. The only question with him is playing time. The only question is, can he stay healthy? Because if he can, he's a guy that can get you 30 homers from your shortstop's position, which I know you mentioned wanting to get speed there. But in my opinion, if the value is there at this round, you can conceivably get speed at other positions. It doesn't have to come from your middle infield spot. And in the way I draft, I'm drafting a lot of 5 category guys early on. So I'm hoping to have already had a solid stolen base by the time we got to this point of the draft. So I am comfortable targeting power over speed at this point. So, what are your thoughts on any more thoughts on what I just said before we move on to the next batch?
No, no, those are good points. I think, yeah, Perdomo 100 RBIs is crazy. I guess what I do think with him though is it's very possible that we see him leading off or hitting second, and that he's a bit like Trey Turner. Like I wouldn't be shocked if he gave us almost the exact same stat line as Trey Turner. He made a huge jump at age 25. I get it. And I wish the price were lower, but I'm just gonna throw that out there that I wouldn't be surprised if he gave us, 15, 25, 26, 27 steals with 100 runs and 70 RBI and, hits 270, 275. So, um, yeah, I'm with you on Seager. He's just such a great hitter. I guess, last year I had a couple teams with him. Same thing with Glasnow. And I probably shouldn't carry over that bias, but I don't know. I just got hurt by the missed time in both cases. So it depends on the league, though. I think if you're doing like a draft and hold, I'm more avoidant, and I think I've done more of those drafts so far. And I think in a fab league, it's definitely more palatable. So yeah, I don't really disagree with anything you said.
Yeah, no, in a draft and league setup, I might be more inclined to take someone like Perdomo just because of the safe floor. I do think he has at least a safe enough floor for me to want to target him there. But at the end of the day, though, my rankings are more 12-team fob redraft situations, and I need more upside with a pick at around pick top 75. So, but if Perdomo falls to me around pick 90 plus, then I might be more inclined to take him at that draft price. But I'm not taking him a current ADP. I've got him at least a couple rounds later in terms of my fade. So yeah, but I think the format does make a difference. Deeper formats, I might want to be a little more safe because the replacement value on the waiver wire isn't there, or you don't have waivers. And so you need safety. So depending on the format does matter. But for me, I'm talking 12-team standard leagues, and that's why I have him lower because the upside doesn't justify his current ADP. So yeah, let's move on to what we're gonna do here for the running out the top 24 is I'm gonna list off the guys that are in this range, and I want you to give me a target and a fade here. Or I see you have a couple of targets, so we'll talk about your targets and then your fade, and I'll give you a couple of my names. But so Bo Bichette is the 12th at 102. Trevor Story at 106. Then we have a bit of a drop off to Willie Adames at 134. Another drop off to Dansby Swanson at 152. Xavier Edwards and Jacob Wilson going back to back at 183, 184. Griffin inside the top 200 now at 198. Ezekiel Tovar, 203. Jose Caballero, 205. And a little bit of a drop off to Colson Montgomery to 223. Otto Lopez, 230. Sander Bogarts down to 242. JJ Weatherholt at 243. So those are the guys in the 12 through 24 range. Michael, let's start with who's your big target here and why?
Well, it's interesting. I like a bunch of these guys. This is kind of what I meant earlier about, that there's the top 20 or so is really good at shortstop, I think, relative to some other positions. Um, and then after this, it gets real sketchy, or towards the back end and beyond, it gets real sketchy. But um, I like Adamas. I think his price is a little low. I think it's fair. I get why people are a little bit hesitant with him, but I mean, he still hit 30 home runs. The interesting thing was, he had 220 in the first half and he only had 12 homers in 96 games. That's like you said, the All-Star break first half as opposed to the literal um, end of June if you split it into 3 months, 3 months. So it's like, well, what is going on here? I think a lot of that might have been his contract situation, new city, new team. I watched a lot of Giants being out here, and I don't know, it did seem like he was maybe pressing. It's hard to tell that on television, obviously, but he's one of those guys that he really gets into. He's a really good team leader. He's really enthusiastic. I think he's got a great presence, and you can just tell he wanted to do well, right? And his BABIP was lower than his career. But the interesting thing with Adamas is I think that it was just some of it was bad luck. Like the whole season, either half, his strikeout rate was around 26%. Rate was still 12.6 in the first half. So there wasn't really a big difference in the underlying stuff. So, I think you have to consider the batting average is going to be an issue, but he's going to hit near the top of a, pretty good lineup. They're not great, but it's solid. And so I think that he's a four category, 10 steals, you're going to get upper 20s home runs, you're going to get around 10, 12 steals, and you just have to kind of build around the batting average. I also think I don't know if I listed this when I sent this back to you, but I think Story is really interesting. I haven't actively gone after him, but I'm kind of wondering if that's a mistake. Like he had this great season, 25-31 through 263, but there's nothing like fake or lucky really when you dig into it. Career high average EV at 91.4, career high hard hit 47%, almost 10% barrel rate. Um, he doesn't even pull it in the air that much. You almost wonder, is there potential for more power? Um, and he only got caught stealing once on 32 attempts. So, it's pretty legit. I've kind of avoided him like most people in the last few years due to the health problems, but it is interesting at the cost. And the other thing with shortstop too is if you wait too long, you're kind of like, okay, because I think Swanson is kind of that cutoff of a starter that you'd want, that you kind of trust in terms of the playing time, and it's just kind of writing in the production. So those guys are interesting. I've never been a big Bichette guy, especially with the injuries recently, but obviously he's a great hitter. You're not gonna get any steals. He does hit a lot of ground balls, and he doesn't pull it, so I think there's some cap on the power, but, he's gonna be really productive if he's healthy, but, again, remember, he had a pretty full year, but he wasn't healthy at the end. He wasn't healthy in the first, right until the middle of the World Series, basically, so I do kinda worry that in terms of will he be available, and then I also think that, I think Tovar is interesting from a projection standpoint. His dollar value, if you use like the Bat X, is 18. It's the same as Adamas, it's the same as Bichette, and it's not that far below Betts if we convert his production to dollars. So that's a huge value. Like in an auction setting, he's going for, I think, 8 or 10, maybe 12 max. So there's a pretty good profit potential there if you believe the projections. He's another guy, he's not going to run that much, but if he hit 260, 20 to 25 homers with 8 to 10 steals, I wouldn't be surprised. And that is kind of similar to, a bet. Obviously, it's a lot less trustworthy. That's why he goes a lot later. And he dealt with some injuries. So there's questions. His approach is, he chases a ton, but he makes good contact. And 9% barrel for a middle infielder is pretty good. And then the other guy I would highlight is Otto Lopez. Nothing sexy, nothing crazy. He's not gonna steal 30. He's not gonna hit 25 bombs. He's not gonna bat 300, but he's just super solid. Couple years in a row now where you're looking at a plus batting average, and you can kind of count on maybe, 15-15. Depends a little bit where he settles in that lineup in terms of the other stats, but I do like him as a middle infielder. And he has second base eligibility too, which is great. Obviously, that adds value.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on Adamas. I love his power. I mean, going at pick 134, have him ranked pretty decently higher on the Williamson 300. I talked about this before. In terms of power, Adamas has the power profile that should play in any park, and it obviously did play in San Francisco despite it being a pitcher's park. He can barrel it. He's got good hard hit and exit velocities, got good launch angles. And so it's not like he's a guy that has a weakness in his power profile. There isn't one. And so he's a guy that I'm very confident going to get you some power. He is someone you're going to have to make sure you pair him up with some good batting average assets around him. But when you get to this part of the draft, legit 5 category dudes aren't growing on trees at this point. And so you're going to have to take a hit somewhere with a lot of these guys going in this range. You're getting to the point now where you're getting just 3 or 4 category dudes anyways. And so, I can draft him here and then also make sure I pair him up with the guys that I have early on that have good batting averages. And then later in the draft, I can target dudes like Yandy Diaz. But if I absolutely have to, Luis Ariz, there are guys that you can get later on to help supplement the batting average to help you absorb that hit. So I'm not a fan of tanking, punting a category. So I'm very much in on Adamas. I also like Otto Lopez as well. He's a guy that's solid power speed floor here. A guy you're going to get around 15-15, a decent batting average. I wonder if he's going to eventually move himself up that Miami batting order because right now I think he's probably going to bat around fifth or sixth, which isn't all that great in a lineup that is not as good as you would hope for a guy batting at that point. So I do question the counting stats right now, but I think he's eventually going to work his way up to the top. I think the 1-2 in Miami should be Lopez and Edwards. I'm not a big Jacob Marcy fan. And so I think that he's going to be the dude at the top there with Edwards being driven in by guys like Kyle Stowers and Griffin Conine behind him. So I think that's where it's going to end up for Miami. So that's another reason why I like him a little bit more. And so I'm very much in on him as well. My big target in this range, you mentioned him as kind of the last part of the range where you're comfortable with them being a starting shortstop. As Dansby Swanson. I don't think this man gets enough love. He's a guy that's going to hit 20 homers, steal 20 bases, or get close to at least. He has 22 plus homers in 3 of his last 4 campaigns, 18 plus steals in 3 of his last 4 campaigns. The home runs went down in 2024 along with the barrel rate, but that all normalized back to normal. We now have a 10% plus barrel rate in 6 of his last 7 seasons. A hard hit rate that went up to 47% and has been in that neighborhood before. A decent launch angle, 13 degrees, a good pull rate, 46% as well. I think he had a 240 something batting average for a lot of years in a row. So I think that's just a solid floor. The batting average that's not going to hurt you. It's not a plus. but it's not going to hurt you either. And so you can live with the batting average. You got good steals, you got good home runs. I think he's batting in a really good Chicago lineup. So he's going to get RBI and runs, and all the goodies are going to be there for you. So I think Swanson is someone who I am very in on. Especially at pick 153 going outside of pick 150. He's someone that I would be comfortable taking around pick 120, 125. And I would be 100% okay with that. What are your thoughts on Mr. Swanson before we get to our fades?
Yeah, I love him. I mean, he's just one of those classic, and when you listen to some of the really great players, the guys that are, crushing NFBC leagues, a lot of times, one of the key things is just like stack bankable profit players along the way, take shots here and there, but like he's kind of the perfect embodiment of that idea. It's like you know what you're gonna get. He's durable, he plays all the time. Um, yeah, he's not gonna hit 220 randomly. He's not gonna hit 290 either, but he's like you said, it's not gonna drag you down anywhere. The one thing I did notice, Roster Resource has a great tool, the in-season what do they call it? The in-season tools, and it shows you the lineups of the team going back through the season. And the one thing with Swanson, he did hit seventh, eighth a lot,
Yeah.
and that is a great lineup. So there are going to be, I mean, if Nico and Bush are in front of you, you're going to still have some guys to drive in. But that is one thing that's kind of limiting. But his volume is so good that I wouldn't worry that much about.
Yeah, he's going to play a lot, and so even playing a lot in the 6, 7 spot, Tucker gone, so maybe he moves up a spot or two. So that's a possibility there. But like you said, he's going to have the volume to make up for it. So even if he is batting 6th or 7th, he's been batting 6th or 7th nearly every single day. So he's going to be able to accumulate stats that way. He's going to get you the home runs and the steals, and that's for me, that's a good floor. Like you mentioned, that's bankable production that you can target, and I love that from Swanson, especially at this draft price. So, who are a couple of guys you might be fading in this range?
Yeah, so I never draft Xavier Edwards. Maybe that's a mistake, but I never, even if I take Otani in the first and, Alonso in the third or second, like I never feel so great about my power in, the 14th or 15th round where I can just take a guy that's going to give me 3 homers. Like, I don't know. I don't like the profile. I mean, he had 619 plate appearances last year. He scored 75 runs with 43 RBI. I don't know. I mean, it's not inspiring. He did lead off a ton. I don't know if that's going to be the case this year. Um, they've been experimenting with Marcy leading off in spring, and talking about that a little bit. So who knows? Maybe they put him in ninth and have him as the quote unquote second leadoff guy, the table setter at the bottom. There's just too many flaws. A sub 1% barrel last year. Um, he's a great spackle if you have batting average and steals. I get that. Um, it's just never a profile that interests me. And then I think, I don't know, Jacob Wilson's interesting. Um, I don't know. It's funny because that park is so small and it gets so hot there that I think it kinda helped him boost the homers over 10. I could get 13, but there's just nothing in the data that kind of gives you confidence that, that's gonna continue. He makes a ton of contact, uh, oh, yeah, he had 10 barrels last year and 13 homers. How often is that gonna happen? and he doesn't pull it in the air a lot either. And he has a 53% ground ball rate. So, the Bad X says 7 homers. Oopsie says 12 homers. It's probably somewhere in between there. He doesn't steal. Should hit at near the top of the lineup. So I don't know. Like I like to translate them into dollar values sometimes, and if I aggregate his projections, Bad X, Oopsie, Steamer, etc., he's an $8 player, and in auctions he's going for 8. So it kind of tells you, like, in the market there isn't really room for profit unless you think there's more power there, or he hits like 330 or something. Um, so yeah, I'm not that interested in him. I did draft him once. It was my first or second draft of the year, and he went really late, and I was like, throw him in there for the batting average. But as the leagues get more important, as time grows shorter, before the season, I'm unlikely to take Wilson as well.
Yeah, no, I feel like on Edwards, his profile is very limited. He is the kind of guy that if I am drafting sluggers early, like if I draft like I don't know Cal Raleigh and then Saya Suzuki and then Willie Adames, and I'm getting all these guys that are big power bop dudes, but don't have very good batting average or steals. Then Xavier Edwards will be there for me around pick 140, 150, and for me to take him there to help fortify that batting average in the steals department. Even in the next round, I would take Yandy Diaz. I think it is batting average, the category that often kind of gets overlooked. A lot of times when we get enamored by the counting stats, but batting average is still there, man. You still got to have a good batting average. And so, again, it depends on my team build. It depends on who I've drafted up to this point, is whether or not I'm taking someone like Edwards at this cost. He's not someone who I'm targeting, but he's someone who's kind of on my, break class in case of emergency type list. And I will say I will definitely rather have him than Jose Caballero. I think Jose Caballero
Yeah.
is definitely just there for the steals merchant. The batting average isn't very good. There's virtually no homers, and whenever Volpe comes back, he might not have an everyday role. So Caballero is one of my big fades here. And he's someone that even if I need steals, I'm not drafting because he's not going to be an everyday player. When Volpe comes back, which
Right.
most recent report says it could be as early as April, so it's not even going to get like a full month's worth. Caballero is going to be someone who's probably going to lead the league in steals in the month of April because he's going to play so much. He's going to have a lot of helium. And I think he's going to be the biggest sell high in fantasy baseball at that point because he's going to lose that everyday role. And I know he's got the versatility, and there's some questions about Ryan McMahon at third there, so he might play some at third for McMahon, help spell some of the veterans around the diamond because he is so versatile. But he's someone that is a part-time player. And I can't draft that around pick 200. There's so many everyday players that are going at this range. I can't take Caballero there. And probably my biggest fate though, and I'm probably going to catch it from the masses because everyone loves this dude right now, is Connor Griffin. No, no. Why? It's at the pick 200 already for someone who might begin the year in the minors. Look, I mean, like I know he just hit 2 homers today, but the manager said it pretty succinctly. He's like, it's going to be tough for him to make it. He's 19 years old, has only played a handful of games in Double A, has mostly played in Low A and High A ball. And I get it, the talent is there. He's an incredibly uber talented dude, but he won't even be 20 when opening day comes around. And you want to talk about a team like the Pirates who are trying to win right now. He's the bar for him to make the opening roster is higher now than it was but when the offseason started, because if the Pirates were just strictly looking to the future, if they're just like, all right, we're playing for the future, trying to develop our guys, then Connor Griffin getting the call up now to potentially give them a draft pick if he is able to win the award would make more sense. But they're not in that camp right now. They're in win now mode, which means that he has to perform in spring training. He has to prove to them that he can do it. And look, Nick Gonzalez isn't like some, oh my God guy, but he batted 260 a couple years ago, 70 last year. He's a veteran dude that you know what you're going to get. And the Pirates very easily could just say, hey, look, we're trying to win. We got a veteran, steady guy with Nick Gonzalez that we can play with. I know the defense isn't all that great, but like at the same time, if the Pirates are trying to win, Connor Griffin might be too much of a question mark. And he probably misses the month of April, and he might get called up if Nick Gonzalez is a dumpster fire. But I can't, for me, I want to wait till around pick 230, 240, 250 before I start taking these shots. You still have some guys at this range that are that have a spot, that have good production. You know what you're going to get. Connor Griffin is just too much of a wild card for me to take him at his current price. Are you going to be one of the masses that hate me, or are you got thoughts?
No, no, I get it. I have not. Let me see. I'm just trying to look up one of the cutoffs, like the Super 2 cutoff. I don't know if it's been calculated yet. I think that's a floating thing, but yeah, I haven't taken him. I mean, he's the talent is outstanding. I mean, I think you know, he could play 2 months this year, and next year he's a top 20 pick or
Yeah.
whatever. He's a freak. He's this big guy who can run super fast, and just all the prospect guys are like, "This reminds me of Trout," you know? So I get it. One of my friends, Lucas Beery, writes for FT. He's been snapping him up, which has kinda made me second guess it. I've been in kind of the camp of, I don't trust the Pirates, I don't trust Bob Nutting. If
Mm.
there's a way for them to be a little better, and then kinda like the Bubba Chandler thing last year, string this along. He doesn't have even that much experience at Double A and none above Double A. You could see them kind of, having a justifiable plan to restrict him until, the very end where they can retain the rookie eligibility for 2027. So that's my fear with it. It's not really about the talent. I don't really hate the pick either. It's not a fade. I think if he fell a little more, I would potentially do it. But yeah, I mean, it has a lot of risk. You got to be prepared to stash a guy who isn't injured, and that creates tension with your bench and management of your lineup. So I'm kind of just in the middle. I'm wishy-washy on it, I guess. I don't hate it, but I haven't done it myself either. But it could be a missed opportunity. I don't know.
Yeah, and you know what? If I miss out this year, I won't be kicking myself too much because I'm just that confident in this take.
Yeah.
I am. I think that there's especially now. Like I mean, in a month from now, if we're hearing from the manager that he's going to be on the squad, he's just tearing it up. Then I'll become more open to drafting him. But at that point, if that happens, he might become like a top 100 pick. Like he might just be someone who people just lose their ever loving mind on, and
Yeah.
is go, I'm going to take this guy here at pick 90 or take this guy here at pick 100. I'm just going to go, okay, well, never mind on that one. You have fun. Because I mean, I remember as an Astros fan, I remember Cam Smith at the back end of spring last year was all over the place. He was got so much hype. I mean, I'm pretty sure he became like a top 200 dude at the end of spring last year and the one in the final drafts. And well, we saw how that worked out. It's just the thing where it's like the guy gets so much hype and so much momentum in spring training, so much helium, and it's just a bar that is just impossible for them to get over. And the range of outcomes is just too wide for me at this point. Going and looking at the guys going at his price right now, get my computer to let me scroll down. You got I love South Stewart there. You got Shane Boz. Brian Reynolds going at 202. He's a major target of mine. Addison Barger's going after him. Pitching wise, you got Chris Bubick. You got let's see here, Christian Walker. Jack Caglione. If you're looking for a young guy that I think has a little bit safer upside because he has a pretty much a guaranteed spot. You got Jack Caglione going later. Sal Frelick has a good floor. There are guys that you got good production that are going just after him. And so I don't know if I can take that kind of risk. Maybe if like I'm just taking so many safe, boring players that I need some sparkle, then I don't know, maybe. But like, yeah, I
Yeah.
just, it would have to be a shallower format too, where I know I'm going to get really good replacement value on the wire if I do take him. So that's another thing I need to think about. In a deep league, I'm sure as shit not taking him because I don't know what that waiver wire replacement value looks like.
Yeah.
In a shallower format, I might be a little more inclined, but I'm still going to wait to at least pick 220, 230. I'm going to wait to the very bitter end before I draft him. Same thing with Munataki Murakami. I'm going to wait to the bitter end before I take him because I don't want to spend hardly any capital on guys like this that have such a wide range of outcomes.
Oh, Murakami's making contact. He's had a couple hits in both his games. Maybe it's overstated, but I totally get it. I wasn't taking him at all. I took him in one draft, and it was kind of like it just fit the team. I had a good batting average, and I wanted power, and he fell, so I took the plunge. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot. He can go a lot of different ways. That's for sure. There's a lot of downside
Yeah.
as well.
Yep. Yep. And it's like, and it's one of those things where it's just like, if someone like the Dodgers had thrown the money at him, I'd be more in on him. But he's someone
Right.
that had to settle for a prove it deal from the White Sox.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's, Anthony Case, our dynasty guy here, made a really good point on the podcast a few months ago. It was, we got to look at what these contracts look like. If major league teams that we trust are throwing money at guys, then we should probably take note. But if he ends up having to take a prove it deal from a crappy team, which is what happened, the White Sox gave him like a bag of chips on a couple of years and said, "All right, prove it." And that's where we're at now. And so that makes me scared because I'm like, well, if the Dodgers weren't willing to give him a bunch of deferred money, if the Astros or the Mets or all these teams that needed especially left-handed power help, were like, yeah, I don't know about that. Then I too am going to be, well, I don't know about that. So it might be a little bit too simplistic, but I think it just makes intuitive sense. Any more thoughts these days before we get to deep league sleepers?
Um, no, I will say that in the boring is beautiful category that Xander Bogarts at I'm not saying he should go like top 150 or anything, but I don't totally get the price. I guess the risk is that the projections are saying 15, 16 homers, and he's hit 11 the last 2 years, so that is a little scary, but he's also stolen 20. He hits 260, like clockwork, and he's gonna be near the top of that lineup. I think Weatherholt's interesting. It seems pretty obvious that he's gonna be on the opening day roster.
Yep.
He showed some speed as well last year, good plate approach. So I think if you wanted to take a quote unquote gamble on a prospect, obviously the upside is not the same, but he goes quite a bit later than Griffin. So I think he's interesting as well. But yeah, those are the last things with that. And then I have a couple deep names. So
Right on, man. Yeah, no, I'm with you on Xander and Weatherholt both. I like the discount of Weatherholt going at pick 240. I'm much more likely to do that than I am Connor Griffin at 190. Then, he's just an all around dude. Like, I don't think he has one particular tool that just jumps out at you. Maybe the speed is, but at the end of the day, he's someone who I think can solid batting average, some homers, some steals. I'm thinking Brandon Donovan with a little more steel, a little more power kind of dude. Gonna have a good contact guy, good batting average kind of thing. And then a Bogarts, just like you said, safe, safe, safe. If I miss out on middle infield to this point and I need a middle infield starter, Xander Bogarts sitting there, I'll take him. Absolutely, 100%. I'm hopeful that at this point in the range, though, I've got my middle infield and my starting shortstop and second base locked up already where I'm not having to take a Bogarts. But if that's just how the draft shakes out, I'm not upset. I'm fine with it. It's he's like a nice little soft little blanket for you to wrap yourself in if you panic and realize you don't have the middle infield options that you wish you would have grabbed earlier. So yeah, no, I'm with you on Bogart. So moving on to our sleepers, deep sleepers, guys that we haven't mentioned yet that you think are going to be guys to know. Well, who's your first name?
Yeah, so I really for deeper leagues, especially draft and hold leagues, but I think he's also a potential, last round or 2 guy in a even in a 30 round Fab League draft is Nasim Nunez with the Nationals. Elite defense, he's super fast, and the manager has been kinda gushing over him a little bit about his energy, his bat to ball ability. They've experimented with him, in 2 of their first 4 games, he led off. That wasn't all starters, it was kinda they've used mixed squads in the across their 4 games. But, I mean, this guy stole 70 bags in 22, he stole 52 in 23 in the minors. Um in limited time, like 232 plate appearances last year. He stole 36, and then he came up to the pros and stole 9 bases in 92 plate appearances. So, um, I I don't think he's gonna there's not a lot of power there, but he's also likely to play second base since I think Abrams is safe, at least for now, at shortstop. So he's a shortstop eligible player, likely to get second base, probably bottom of the lineup, but just like a cheap speed source who, who knows if he can, his walk rates have been pretty good in the minors. If he can get on base, like I mentioned earlier, Abrams 306 career OBP, who knows? Maybe Nunez gets some run at the top. Um, I like him. I've drafted Colt Emerson a few times. He's kind of in the Weatherholt mold. Just a really solid all-around prospect with the Mariners. And I don't know. I think earlier in the offseason, they had talked about a path for him to make the opening day lineup, but then, they trade for Brendan Donovan. So I think that kind of closed that door or the most obvious door for him to walk through. And Cole Young is on the 40 man and probably the favorite to play second base, whereas Emerson isn't. They can hold him back, retain the eligibility. So maybe we don't see him as early as I initially thought, but I did like him. And then if you can stash, I think Kim with the Braves, Hassan Kim is a good one. You can kind of know what he is, 10 to 15 homers, 20 to 25 steals. Um, should play every day when he's healthy, and he's ahead of schedule in his rehab. They said May, I think, where it initially looked like June. And then super deep is Mateo, who's also with Atlanta. I know they have Dubon, but Mateo's got a lot of speed. That's kind of a draft and hold plug and play for stolen bases guy, in case he gets more run than we expect.
Yeah. I mean, doors will have to open up for Mateo to get some playing time. But I get the value there, especially super duper deep in a draft and hold. I'm in my NFBC 50 now. He might be someone I wouldn't mind drafting. Pick like 35 or something like that. Once
Mm.
you get to the nitty gritty there, I love Hassan Kim. I was getting ready for him to be a major target of mine. I was going to hype him up hardcore because last year in his limited playing time, he continued to do what he does. Good launch angles, gives him a good floor for his power, and then he's got the speed. He hits a little more line drives than what people think. So the batting average 4 isn't horrible. A guy, especially at what I think should at least be a slightly better Atlanta lineup. So with decent enough counting stats, I love Hassan Kim. He just can't stay healthy. And that
Yeah,
just sucks because he's just such a solid ball player. He's not anything special. You know what you're going to get. 15-15 kind of do, maybe 20 steals, batting in the right lineup, getting him some counting stats, so I've been a fan of Hassan Kim. It's just a matter of can he stay healthy. And yeah, with Colt Emerson, Cole Young is going to be the guy he's going to have to beat out. And unless Cole Young just implodes in spring, I don't know if Emerson's going to have the playing time, but he is the next man up. And if there's an injury, he's probably the first man they call up. And so, and I'm a sort of a fan of Cole Young. I'm in a 16 team, very deep dynasty league. We roster something like, I don't know, 150, 200 prospects kind of thing. And so in that league, I did pick him up off the wire in the offseason. Just a solid potential batting average guy with some steals. So I do like Cole Young on a certain level. But for me, my two sleeper picks, I got Carlos Correa. He's not super deep sleeper. I think his ADP is like 275 or something like that. But he's definitely someone that I think people are sleeping on. I think he's someone that you can comfortably draft closer to pick 220 or so. Look, he people have this perception that he's injury prone, but he has 500 plus plate appearances in 4 of his last 5 campaigns. Still has a great hit tool, consistently good batting average. And look, the barrel rate looked like it was a 1 year drop off last year, down to 6.8%, where he's typically been 9 to 10% throughout his career. And he still has a really good, a good hard hit numbers at 44 to 45% there. And so I think you're going to see him get the barrel rate back up. Going to be batting in the Houston ballpark that is kind of a banging box for homers. Going to have a good batting average, good counting stats batting in that Houston lineup, good RBI opportunity, good runs scored. And look, it's another guy that I thought would be younger. He's only 31 years old. And so it's not like he's like on the bad side of 35, staring down an age cliff here. He still has some years ahead of him. And so I really like Carlos Correa at his draft price. And then my super deep sleeper is Jet Williams in Milwaukee.
Yeah,
Dude
right.
has, I think, has sneaky power. We know about the steals. He had, let's see here, how many steals was it? I thought I had it written down here somewhere. 34 steals last year with 17 home runs. He has good lift, the sub 40% on the ground ball rate throughout his entire minor league career. He got the pull rate in the minors up to 45%. His question as a prospect was his hit tool, but he got that strikeout rate down to 22%, has an overall contact rate of 76%, and the swinging strike rate of 9.9%. So he's got the hit tool under control. I think he has a little bit more power to give, given the angles that he's hitting at. With a lot of pull and a low ground ball rate, he's got the steals, good hit tool for the batting average, and I think he beats out Joey Ortiz. I think Milwaukee's going to be looking for a little more oomph. Going to be looking for a little more out of their shortstop position. And so I think that he's going to win out over Joey Ortiz. Ortiz, I don't think, is a major obstacle, maybe on the defensive side of things. But I think at the end of the day, Jet Williams, I think, is going to overtake Ortiz. So what are your thoughts on those two sleepers before we round out the pod?
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, I like both of those. I think Correa, Correa's kinda like a Corey Seager light, good batting average, decent power, and no steals, and health issues. So just don't draft both of them, I'd say. But yeah, I mean, he's a super solid hitter, as you said. And I like Williams, and he's playing some center field in spring, and I think I also like Garrett Mitchell for a bounce back, but let's face it, he has not been able to stay healthy,
Hmm.
and he has some hit tool concerns. So, there could be an opening, maybe not opening day, but I could see Jet working his way up to the big club in the first couple months and maybe play some outfield and maybe he could play some third too. I think they like Ortiz's defense, but I have
Yeah.
to say that he can't, he just hasn't hit. So if he struggles again, maybe Jet plays shortstop, but we'll see how that works out. But yeah, I like both of them.
Right on, man. Right on. And I did skip over Nunez on buy-in to talk about yours, and yeah, no, I'm with you. It's a good line drive rate. That's what I like about him is that I think it gives him a good batting average floor to go with the steals.
Yeah.
And so I think he's going to be able to maintain a spot in that lineup, especially with the defense that he plays. And he's going to have at least a decent enough batting average with that line drive rate to keep his spot potentially at the top of the lineup. and to get him some, like I said, like I mentioned earlier with Abrams, the top of the national lineup isn't horrible. You got Nunez to go with Dylan Cruz and James Wood and CJ Abrams there. Don't sleep on Brady House either. I really like. I think he's got a little sneaky upside. He used to kind of be a big name in the prospect circles. That's kind of lost some of his shine. But I think he's going to get that. He's going to get that shot this year. He is. He's going to be the open day third baseman, and so I think some people might be sleeping on Brady House as well. So that's not a at the top of the lineup for the Nationals. There's RBI and runs to be had, and I think Nunez will be there to soak it up, man. But yeah, no, Jet Williams. Of course, the defense is going to be the question. Can he play good eat up defense to overtake Ortiz and have Ortiz's offense be his death nail? I ultimately think it will happen. I think it might even happen as soon as opening day. Just because the Brewers, man, they need a little extra oomph in that lineup. They need a little extra. They need to lengthen the lineup out a little bit, man. They really do. And I think Jet Williams is someone that can do that. So, anyways, anything we missed? Anything else you want to talk about before I let you go?
No, I think we covered it pretty well, pretty deep there. One last little note for people if they're still here would be another Williams, Carson Williams, who has a hit tool issue, but good power, good speed, good defense, and Taylor Walls, I think, is dealing with something even now and is always nicked up. They love Walls, but again, he misses a lot of time. So Carson Williams goes very deep in drafts. Could be a 2020, and he'll bat 220, but the 2020 is interesting at least. So last name I'll throw out there. And
Yeah, no, I love Carson Williams. He's someone that, I kind of targeted in some trade discussions last year. That Dynasty League I mentioned earlier, I'm in full rebuild mode. And so he's someone that I was definitely looking forward to. Because the Tampa Bay Rays, man, the way they play their infield, the way they play their lineups, I can see him just being another one of the guys they throw 400 plate appearances at, and not necessarily an everyday player, but definitely someone who they're going to, potentially give a long look at, especially with the health issues of Walls that you already mentioned. So, yeah, no, Carson Williams is definitely someone that should be on your short list of names to watch as we head into the season. Alrighty, y'all. So that's going to bring us to the end of the podcast. Want to give one last thank you to Michael Cecchini.
you got it eventually.
Yeah, all right. And he find his work at Rotoballer. He also has a Substack that you can check out on his X profile where you follow him at Zeitgeist, Zeitheist, the number one. That's on X, and then without the number one on Bluesky as well. So check out his work, man. A great baseball mind, someone who can really help you win your leagues. And also make sure you follow me on Twitter at PaulW_34, at PaulW_30 on Twitter without the underscore on Bluesky. Hit me up. Let's get ready for 2026 together. Make sure you check out the draft guide at sportsethos.com. Get my Williamson 300, the draft tracker, all those lovely goodies to help you win your leagues for less than a price of a cup of coffee per day, per month. Not per day, but per month. And just check us out there, y'all. Let our experts help you win your leagues. Then please rate and subscribe to podcast. Please rate and subscribe to podcast, both the where you get your podcast on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere else, but also on YouTube at the Sports Ethos YouTube channel. That's at Sports Ethos there. Please subscribe, get all of our podcasts, get all of our goodies. I just want to get ready for 2026 together, help us win some leagues together, y'all. So one last major thank you to Michael Cecchini and at Rotoballer joining me on the podcast. So he's Michael, I'm Paul. This has been Fantasy MLB Today Sports Ethos presentation brought to you by FanDuel. Y'all have a good one.